All right, I think let me do a quick introduction, and then we can hand over to Justin to do the presentation. All right, for today's session, the session was supposed to be the first on your agenda. So we are going to have a keynote session from our CEO at Code for Africa. He's going to introduce today's theme, and today's theme is actually religion and disinformation. So how do you, how is the intersection between religion as a topic and also disinformation, or fake news as people call it out there? So Justin is our CEO at Code for Africa. He'll do a more comprehensive introduction of himself and also the organization for the people who don't know some of the other projects that we have. So over to you, Justin, and yeah, welcome.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for being in the room and making yourselves available for this chat. So just very quickly, I'm the CEO at Code for Africa, alongside our partners ICFJ. We work across the continent to support newsrooms. I'm originally South African. I'm currently based in Tbilisi, which is in the Republic of Georgia, kind of between Turkey, Azerbaijan, Russia, and Ukraine. A really interesting part of the world, but I still work extensively across Africa itself. And I'm a journalist by background. So just a very quick overview. I'm sure you've heard this a few times in the week, so I'm not going to spend much time on it. But Code for Africa is basically a non-profit with quite a large global or kind of continental footprint. All those countries in dark blue is where we have full-time staff and officers across the continent. In light blue is where we have or support partners, where we inject our people into other organizations to assist them with their work. A big focus of our work is finding evidence and data for better public accountability, including looking into extremism and disinformation across the continent. And as part of that, we are we work through global partnerships, because this problem of disinformation driving extremist narratives is just too big for any one organization or even one coalition to solve. And so we work very hard to pull together the efforts at global level and direct those benefits down to country level across Africa. And on the screen, you'll see some logos of just some of the initiatives and the partners that we work with. We try and bring together everything from AI tools and kind of domain experts through to frontline, in the trenches, journalism and fact-checking, to make sure that we have a big impact. We do this through something called the African Digital Democracy Observatory. It focuses on everything from faith-based kind of extremist narratives and conspiracy theories through to foreign nation-driven disinformation campaigns to try and disrupt countries in Africa. And I'll speak more about this in a bit later in my talk. But we also support fact-checking across the continent, because pointing something out as being extremist or kind of inaccurate is only part of the kind of solution. You need to help steer people towards information that is correct and accurate, and you need to do that quickly. So we support something called the African Fact-Checking Alliance. It works across 20 countries in Africa at the moment. It's roughly about 240 partner newsrooms, and we help them doing training such as the one that you've been through with the Open Source Investigative Academy. All of this work tries to bring together the kinds of tools and technologies that journalists usually don't have access to. So we do everything from what we call robot helpers. This is machine learning, AI, bots, and so forth. And we help newsrooms and journalists use those to find better evidence. We work with forensic laboratories. So in other words, we'll go and test water samples, test air quality, radiation, and so forth for evidence to back up investigative journalism. We have forensic accountability specialists, like you've been hearing from this week. Alan's team Fidel, Anita, Lou Jane, everyone else in the room. And then we pull all of this together with data scientists who help turn that into information that journalists and the public can use. And all of this is focused on solutions. We don't try and put the fear, any fear into people. We rather try and match them up with solutions that they can use this information to change the world that they're in. And we don't do this by parachuting in. As you've met people in the room, we try and make sure that we find local African experts. There are many, many of us. Find us to kind of pioneer these solutions. We don't want parachuted solutions from the north. Anyhow, we do this, as I'm sure you've heard through the course and a bit this week, by tackling the kind of information disorder problem and the stuff that you're interested in, the extremist narratives from all sides of the religious spectrum fall in this red circle that you can see. It's the disinformation and the malinformation that's a problem. We try and tackle this at Code for Africa through 3 separate teams. And the reason why I'm spotlighting this just before I jump into the topic of the day is because in your newsrooms, you might want to think about how to tackle a very complex problem, not just with one desk or one reporter. You need to build a set of teams in your newsroom that work together and amplify or reuse or support each other's work. If you don't do that, you are never going to be strong enough in your newsroom to really tackle the problem. So in Code for Africa, what we do is we've got a fact-checking team, which is now the largest in Africa. It's called PesaCheck. And its work leads to 5 million posts per year just on Facebook alone being labeled as harmful or misleading information. And it works in a variety of languages. Alongside that, the guys who've been training you on this program, Alan's team, work at something called the iLab. And where, if you think of the fact checkers as the people who are whack-a-mole, they're finding every little dot of a problem, and then they are debunking or fact-checking that one claim. Alan's team takes that one step further, and they figure out the connections between the dots. They join the dots. And so they try and find the networks that are trying to amplify this false information that the fact checkers are debunking. On the back end of that, taking it even one step further, we've got an AI team based out of Cape Town and Kenya and Tanzania, in fact, that uses machine learning tools to do real-time analysis of content as it appears on the internet, and to find the hidden messages that link together all of these conversations. What are the rising trends? What are the topics? What are the narratives that are emerging that make us susceptible to this false information? But in addition to that, they also map who actually owns and controls the media platforms across Africa, because the agendas are often set at ownership level. And at the same time, we'll then also map the media economy to understand who are the puppet masters who are pulling the strings using money to shape what we can and can't cover. All of that comes together in a bunch of tools that people can use. For example, working with the Global Disinformation Index, where including in Nigeria, Kenya, and South Africa at the moment, we're busy expanding it to other countries. We figure out what are the weaknesses structurally in media and advertising companies that can be exploited by conspiracists and extremists to inject their messages into otherwise credible news. And then we work with the Oxford University's Reuters Institute to also then understand public trust. Now, how is that used as a weapon by conspiracists and by extremists? We do all of that by working with partners, and this is just a selection of some of our Kenyan partners, because most of you in the room are Nigerian today. So showing you how it looks on the other side of the continent, we have a similar partner network in Nigeria, Senegal, Burkina Faso, Mali, and so forth, where we bring together apex or top of the media markets, media outlets with media startups, but also with other kinds of civil society and even for-profit analysis organizations who also all contribute towards this information ecosystem. So that's the background of how we approach it and how we've generated some of these insights that I'm going to share with you now. You've heard all week, this is the last day of the conference on extremism. So you've heard all week about how extremism evolves, how it can mislead and incite communities, how it can be weaponized to attack minorities, and how there's a lot of network strategy behind it to try and get that message out as widely as possible. I'm not going to give you the same talk. I'm going to try and show you how extremists who try and undermine governments and use narratives as puppets are themselves used as puppets by even larger global powers who are busy playing with African societies as chess pieces on a larger global political board. So I'm going to shine a light on some of the secret recipes that they are using to subvert our information space. One of the first recipes that we see them using, both the extremists as well as their puppet masters, are a strategy to imitate the media, to impersonate journalists or to pretend that they are legitimate media outlets. We've seen this everywhere from Ethiopia and Sudan through to Kenya, and increasingly now we're seeing it in Francophone West Africa and the Sahel region. And these are startup vaporware kind of digital media outlets. They focus largely on social media. They dress up and often even have what look like real studios, as you can see in the screenshot from Ethiopia. And they stream or kind of use audio and video as much as possible, because it's difficult to analyze, to spread their message online. And they often, in Ethiopia, we've seen even go out in the streets with microphones and do vox pops and act and pretend to be journalists gathering news. But all of it feeds into a specific narrative that they are pushing. We've seen takedowns of large coordinated networks of these. So in Sudan, for example, 36 pages were pretending to be real news media, when in fact there were 2 or 3 people with a political or an extremist agenda. We've seen in Ethiopia taking that one step further, not just pretending to be media, but pretending to be academic institutions or think tanks that supposedly produce research that supports extremist or conspiracist or geopolitical claims and agendas. Where they can't pretend to be media, we see a growing strategy of co-opting media, so recruiting otherwise legitimate media as their publishing platforms. And this often comes through an offer to share content, because media are resource constrained. They can't generate and fill all their web pages or broadcast time or kind of newspaper pages, print pages, with content of their own anymore. And so they're being offered what looks like good quality, free content, but it all comes shaped as propaganda dressed up as journalism. We see this by the large nation states, for example, China, Russia, and others. But increasingly, we're also seeing interest groups and lobbyists and religious kind of networks doing this extensively. At the moment, it seems to be largely out of North America, so Christian kind of focused content sharing kind of schemes, targeting places like Uganda and East Africa, and then also out of the Middle East, out of Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. We're seeing similar content sharing deals, and Turkey is doing a massive push at the moment across Africa with free content, including entertainment content. In addition to that, we're seeing some of these larger players, Turkey, Russia, China, busy establishing global level content hubs in Africa. Russia, just before the invasion of Ukraine, announced a massive push to create a bureau, one of their biggest global bureaus outside of Russia, in Kenya, for example. China already operates one of their largest content hubs outside of mainland China, again in Kenya. And we're starting to see similar ventures by some of the other countries who are pushing a distinctly different line of content. Not wrong in itself, but we need to be aware that they come with an ideological kind of agenda, in the same way that we need to critically engage with and analyze the media coming out of Europe and North America. In addition to that, and potentially most worrying, as recently as in February, we saw Facebook take down a coordinated campaign where disinformation actors were pretending to be a PR agency, a public relations agency, and were offering commissions and freelance contracts to real journalists in Nigeria and elsewhere to get them to cover stories that, in this case, Russia wanted to put onto the news agenda. This is almost impossible to track using disinformation tools, because it's a real journalist who is otherwise credible. It's a real publication that has a real audience, but they're injecting their content through hijacking their journalist by doing a side hustle, by moonlighting. And as you can see, the countries being targeted there are ones that either have conflict or have societal division. And often this content is designed to inflame those conflicts between religious groups, between political groups, and between people who believe in the pandemic or not the pandemic, as an example. In other cases, we're seeing these same global players saying that they can now sell their recipe and their infrastructure to local political parties or anyone else who wants to sow kind of chaos in our societies. And so we're seeing copycats who are using these recipes developed by intelligence and propaganda agencies in Beijing and in Moscow and in Paris and elsewhere. And here's an example of also a fairly recent takedown in largely East and Central Africa, where entire ready-made disinformation networks were sold to local operators who are themselves like subcontractors, they're entrepreneurs, and then on behalf of a political party, they pump their own content into that and start using it to undermine their opposition. So those strategies then also start copying where local operators are now copying kind of intelligence agencies from the north. We also see extremists and lobbyists and others with a message to pull in Africa starting to copy some of the more kind of tech-driven strategies that you see happening in North America and in Europe, including using large-scale bots and AI-generated, manipulated videos or images to spread a message and do it at scale. When we're talking about at scale, we're talking about thousands of robotic-generated video and sound image files, audio files, being released on the internet all at once to fairly large audiences. This is an example from Mali, and examples of how this content is using a montage of trigger images to push a very distinct geopolitical message that builds on fear of insurgents and jihadists in the Sahel region. In addition to that, there's a ready-made, polarized global audience that these disinformation actors tap into. And this is our international diaspora. People who have left the motherland, they're living in Brussels, they're living in New Zealand, Australia, they're living in the US. And because they're far from home, they no longer see the nuances about local issues. They see local politics or local conflict in terms of polarized, far extremist, like right or left, black or white kind of views. They don't really see a middle ground. And they jump onto these digital kind of disputes enthusiastically, as this example from Ethiopia shows, around the Tigray kind of war that's unfolding in Ethiopia. They're quite sophisticated. They offer members a step-by-step guidelines on how to copy, share,